It is an indisputable fact that children are better off in a home with their needs being met and someone to love them than fending for themselves on the street. A fact that is believed to be true everywhere and has been for a very, very long time, which is why we have always had systems in state to ensure that children weren't fending for themselves on the street. Now, this probably doesn't surprise you. What may be surprising, though, are the many issues that are a byproduct of our current solution, or the history behind it all. Before orphanages, children who could not live with their immediate families were simply placed with neighbors or other family members without the aid of the court. This system did not suffice for long, though, due to the flood of immigrants in the United States and the outbreak of many fatal diseases that left lots of children parentless. The explosion of orphan children led to the establishment of orphanages in the early 1800s. Now, when it came to children with no place to go, orphanages really were the best option. However, due to the many children that needed care, orphanages often lacked the means necessary to properly care for these children. In the mid-1800s, a man named Charles Brace identified the issue with orphanages and established the Children's Aid Society, which was founded on the idea that children weren't just unfit for the streets of New York, but not concerningly overcrowded orphanages either. Armed with this knowledge, he sought out a solution and came up with the orphan train. The orphan train was essentially just putting orphans on a train and bringing them out west, where there were more family opportunities and because populations weren't as large. From there, they were placed with pre-approved families who picked them. This was called placing out. The restriction on immigration in the 1920s greatly reduced the number of children in need, and orphanages began shutting down. During the creation and production of the orphan train, orphanages still remained throughout the rest of the U.S. The orphan train eventually stopped operating in 1930 because the need for farm labor subsided, therefore making adopting children less desirable, and the government altered their thinking and wanted to maintain the lives of struggling families. By 1935, most orphanages had shifted gears and focused primarily on aiding mentally and physically dependent children. Social workers were inclined to place able children in foster homes. The care of dependent children continued in this manner until the 1950s, when the majority of states took accountability for their own children in need. Foster care had become the predominant method for care, and orphanages were transformed into temporary residencies and care shelters until foster homes could be found. In the 1960s, the anti-institution movement began, demolishing the vast majority of the remaining orphanages, and the Federal Aid for Families with Dependent Children legislation prevented placing out and focused on reunification with biological families, thus creating the system we have today. Unfortunately, the dependent children crisis has not abated. It is approximated that at any given time there are about 400,000 children in foster homes, who usually spend just over a year in foster care. There are minimal adequate homes for these children. Many people are now proposing we revisit the familiar discussion. Should we reinstate orphanages in the United States? Lots of studies have been conducted in an attempt to settle the dispute. As Richard B. McKenzie put it in Rethinking Orphanages in the 21st Century, the short-lived, soundbite-based national policy debate on orphanage care that took place in 1994 was regrettably founded on orphanages stereotypes, basically saying that Hollywood portrayals of orphanages influenced the debate. Orphanages in modern day might be up for discussion, but there is one thing most everyone can agree on: the foundation for the argument. There are too many problems within the foster care system today, such as aging out. When foster kids turn 18, they are legally adults and no longer need a legal guardian. 23,000 children age out of the foster care system each year with no stable support system ensured. In fact, 25% of children who age out of the foster care system suffer from PTSD. As Katie Dupier puts it on Mashable, there are too many rules, regulations, and players. By rules, she means rules for the foster children. Foster children often feel like they're under surveillance, she says, and they don't have room for mistakes that children in a normal situation would. As I mentioned before, too many kids in the system and not enough adequate homes. Eliminating this factor could help eliminate so many others. For example, the shocking statistics would plummet. Like 20% of kids who age out of the system become homeless immediately after. Now think about if they had a loving family to fall back on. How can you help? You can become a respite parent. A respite parent is an option available to foster parents. You can take a foster child for a weekend to help give the foster parents a break. Then, of course, you can become a foster parent. You can become a youth advocate for children in foster care.